against Dean Barker's Japan, and the Japanese obviously with the edge, having won that opening race of the day here. The wind speeds at the moment around 21 knots or so.
Yeah, we got a couple gusts back up over 20 again, so game on. Fresh and frightening.
Let's get a little word with Bruno Dubois, who's out on the water for us today. Groupama Team France's general manager. Bruno, any change to those conditions out there? It looks just as strong as it ever was.
Okay, right. Yeah, there's a squall coming in just now. In fact, in the last 10 or 15 seconds, I think the wind is coming up, and the Japanese are a little bit late, I think, to come in the starboard.
They're definitely late, but they're also underwater at this stage. One of the byproducts of stuff in the bows is the cockpit's literally filled with water. So you're in a swimming pool to make what is almost an impossible job that much harder. You see these guys are just doing the same thing. They're just milking it in this 2-minute sequence. They don't want to get near each other. They just want to somehow survive it and get off the line.
40 seconds to the trigger, Dino. Keep an eye on him. Coming at you fast.
So the rain pouring down, the wind right up, and this the fourth episode of this semi-final contest between the Swedes and the Japanese in the Louis Vuitton America's Cup Challenges.
Now, if you're Artemis, be careful. Don't play too much possum, because this guy will come get you. And sure enough, they're just kind of sitting there waiting very close to the starting line. Barker's in kind of an interesting spot right now to prevent them from bearing off. So we may see a little bit of match race tactics here nonetheless. Could Artemis possibly bear off and get around behind Dean Barker for an on-time start? That's the big one. Would they accelerate potentially too fast? Let's see if they try to get at his transom right now. I don't think they can get there. I don't think they can bear off fast enough. Artemis is in a tough spot here right now. Barker has them pinned out pretty well. Can they get their bow down underneath like that? And I don't think they can. They're slowing way down, and they're just going to start behind.
Advantage Japan then as they cross the start line, but good speed from the Swedes. They've got up on those foils nice and quick, and they are hammering across the water now.
You can hear the rain pouring on these guys right now. You're right. That's a great call, Ali. Japan started before Artemis, but they struggled to get on their foils. They should be able to get over the top of them right now. 45 knots, 2 boat lengths separation.
Barely anything to choose between these two as they round the first mark, and into the water go the Japanese. That was not
Artemis is not bearing off again. They're not bearing off. They gotta have problems again on board Artemis.
And concerned faces amongst some of the fans out there on the shore. The Swedes seem to be in trouble here. They've ploughed their way through the boundary, and they look to be disappearing into the murk.
They're having obviously serious control issues on board the boat.
Well, this could be a consequence, of course, of the damage incurred in race number 1 for them. Well, look how far through the boundary they've gone. I mean, this isn't an accident. They have decided to try to take a little bit of time out here just to get themselves reorganized.
I know we got a penalty. We're trying to get back in the course area. You'll be well under target, Coach. Where are we on the lake?
So they're under ley line right now. They're actually going to have to come up the ley line, which is more speed. And a lot of times right now, you're trying to avoid speed. It's like diehard Bermudians.
We're having fun.
I swear we're having fun, honey. Come with me today. It'll be a blast.
Okay, got the women holding now.
Yeah, Sweden didn't even try to round that mark. They kind of bailed out. Whether they're lacking hydraulic power in their ability to actually do a maneuver.
Go a bit lower.
And we go back down to Bruno Dubois down on the water. Bruno, the Swedes clearly just couldn't bear off. Is that a sign of maybe lack of hydraulic power?
No, I think they had the same issue on the other race. I think they have an issue with controlling the foil. But what we can see now, the Japanese slow down big time on the bottom mark. They had some issue to start again, but it's difficult to find out the mark. So, can you imagine? You need a navigator on the boat right now.
Now, Artemis still has a penalty, a boundary penalty. They're trying to slow down. They're trying desperately to slow down. The problem is Japan slowed down so much, I don't think they've been able to do that separation. Remember, it's a 2 boat length of what's called VMG separation. Japan slowed down so much going into that mark that Artemis couldn't help but coming into them. They still have a penalty. They've literally kind of stopped on the race course to try to slow down and shake the penalty.
And they came straight in on that ley line, didn't they, Ken, without turning, without changing course, which means that the chief umpire, Richard Slater, won't be removing that penalty anytime soon till he believes they have slowed down sufficiently and Japan have gained the advantage that they, by right, should have had.
That's exactly correct. And when we get to Richard Slater here in a bit, he'll let us know if he gave them multiple penalties for so egregiously getting outside the boundary.
Ian Percy is fuming.
This is ridiculous! Does it look like they're doing something wrong? You get ready to when I'm back ashore! Now I got a tack here, guys.
This is not a happy...
Now we're going back. 100 meters!
I think he feels the penalty has been served, don't you?
I'm not sure.
This is going all the way, Richard! Here we go.
No, he's actually talking to Richard Slater from out there. I'm not sure.
Finally, it's completed, and they're allowed to let the handbrake off. But you can gather the thoughts on board Artemis Racing. The Swedes are furious at that. And of course, they've had their issues with the disciplinary here in Bermuda. They were denied a race win over the Kiwis with a late penalty, which subsequently we learned should not have stood. They were furious at the time, and this is doing nothing for their blood pressure.
We will certainly find out from Richard Slater when we get a chance, but I think what we saw was probably multiple penalties first, going so far outside the boundaries. Secondly, you know, Japan really slowed down coming into this mark. So remember, it's a VMG penalty. They have to actually gap off from where Japan slowed down so much. Artemis came roaring into them so fast on the back part of that run. It just took forever to burn the VMG penalty.
Let's speak to the chief umpire, Richard Slater. Richard, can you explain what you were doing there in holding that penalty on board Artemis Racing?
Yes, we had them well outside the boundary, so much so that they probably saved one jibe once they came back in. That gave them a second penalty. Sweden then continued to sail doing 41 knots and doing nothing to slow the speed, which just made the actual 4 boat length penalty turn into a probably hundreds of meters penalty. Sweden needed to pay that off, and we held them until they got put back into the right position.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm going to guess Ian Percy does not agree at this point. Yeah, listen, you're the sailor out there right now, and Richard's doing his job, doing it, I'm sure, exactly right, and Ian's doing his job, just sticking their guts on the line to get around the race course, and to have to stop and watch a lead just extend like that is the ultimate in frustration. So, unfortunately, I think I've been in Ian's position before, and it is no fun whatsoever. And hey, these are athletes that are trained to win.
And the stakes are so high, of course.
We're gonna have to find out why they couldn't bear off. I mean, let's get back to the root of the problem. They sailed way outside the boundary because they couldn't bear off at that first mark, and that's Now, if we're going to find the reason for all this stuff setting up, for all this activity, why did it happen? Is because they couldn't jibe.
Now you do it in one in a low mode.
Well, we've got a number of boats on the inside of the course at the moment. They're inside the boundary, which is not as it should be. And the Swedes are hammering their way directly towards them.
And you heard Artemis just say spectator boats are actually in the way, so we're going to have to jibe before these guys. It's a bit of chaos out on the...
Well, that can't be right. Right there. Right there in the pathway.
26 knots of wind speed out on the race course right now.
Up a bit. Right wheel.
And they don't need any obstacles.
That is the last thing they need. But
I mean, do they have any recourse to try to get some compensation for that in itself? Because they've been forced to change their path.
We can ask Richard. I doubt it very much. And the reason, you know, it's kind of a shame because could they have laid the mark? I don't think they could have laid that bottom gate even if that spectator boat wasn't there. This little guy's got a lot of legs to go. We're not out of the woods here. We're on the backside of a rain squall. It's blowing 26 knots, and we got some furious sailors out in the race course.
There's a bit going on today, isn't there?
Wow.
Quiet day at the office for Dean Barker. He's staying out of trouble. He's keeping his nose clean at the moment.
Did a really nice job. That pre-start was obviously kind of key. He got the jump because he actually did put a little bit of match racing tactics into the game, and then has sailed pretty clean since then. I don't know if anything's clean, but pretty clean.
I think the most significant thing from their perspective is that they just stayed out of all these conversations that we've been having.
They've been able to tack and jibe when they need to, right? I mean, that is what Artemis hasn't been able to do in both races. They haven't been able to tack or jibe when they've had to a couple times. They've had boat breakage issues, obviously, in the first race, and something happened up at that weather mark in the second race.
This is Bermuda, folks.
It's funny how the trim of those tiny little Code 3 jibs, their smallest jib they can put on the boat, they haven't really cared about it very much today. You know, they've been luffing half the race. Obviously, they have so much power in the wing and the sail plan that it's really an afterthought. It's more simply for helping them probably tack and jibe the boat, I would guess. But clearly not a lot of emphasis put on those little handkerchiefs that they have up front. I mean, look at it right there. It's still luffing after the tack. They're foiling and the jib is actually luffing. It could be at that stage, Ali, that they don't want to burn up any hydraulic fluid on trimming the jib. That probably doesn't make any difference. It's only maybe making them more overpowered. But you would think it would affect the balance of the boat.
So the distance between these two currently around about 700 meters or so. Anything can change, of course, with one bad maneuver, as we've been saying since we arrived here in Bermuda. Such is the competitive nature of these races. There, the damage on board the Japanese boat. Only so much the duct tape can do.
Exactly.
Okay, boys.
Well, the Japanese cruising at this point into Gate 5, cruising towards what would be another very significant win for them. It would be their third of 4 in this Challenger Playoff semi-final against the Swedes. Another win here, and they would be just 2 away from a place in the Challenger Playoff final. And after the qualifying round-robin stages that they endured, and it was something that they broadly endured rather than enjoyed, that would represent a monumental turnaround in fortunes.
Keep coming at me, buddy.
Looks like we may have got some fresh damage to their boat, though.
Yeah, again, I think that's that fairing in the front of the boat. You can see where it's been kind of stuck back together again up there. I'm sure that's just other parts and pieces that didn't get any sort of tape or adhesive put to it in between races. Again, the danger to me there is not necessarily the boat, but it's a piece of sharp carbon fiber flying back into one of the sailors.
Swedes, oh my goodness, they've plunged again. Desperate times for them right now. Riding right up and then nose-diving in. Sort of race they will want to forget, I would suggest, at the end of all of this. Ian Percy's fury from before will not have dissipated an awful lot.
Setting up.
They seem like they're in control, you know, they seem like all the systems are working. Again, going back to that first mark rounding, right after the start, why couldn't they jive? Bits and pieces flying off of that boat too. You see something strange right back there up on the shroud. I'm not sure what that is. That all of a sudden appeared out of nowhere like a piece of carbon.
Hold it on!
Look at the fairings are all breaking away on that one as well.
All right. Don't come up yet. Okay, clear.
Still another 3 legs, 2 long legs, and the blast reach to the finish, of course, for the Japanese to navigate.
These guys, they got, you know, it's a fine line as the skipper of the boat is how hard do you keep racing and how hard do you go into that conservation mode that so many of these guys have talked about, that they do have the ability to kind of pace it a little bit. I wouldn't say a lot, but a little bit.
That's the consistency that Dean Barker will be pleased with, I'm sure. Having been up and down a good deal through the course of the event here in Bermuda.
Yeah, so that's that piece that I circled a little while ago. That it's just it looks again like a piece of fairing of some type, and the reason it's stuck on, there's a crack in the fairing right there, and that crack is actually stuck on the shroud. I don't think it's gonna create any bit of a problem, but don't let it hit you in the head. I mean, that's the bottom line. Those edges are sharp.
This is a replay.
Oh, fell
of, yeah, there we go. Sliding it down.
Lie right.
Hopefully it's not a piece of the wing. If we get a chance, we should look up in the air at the top of the wing to make sure there's nothing, pieces aren't falling out and sliding down that stay. That'd be interesting. That'd make for a bad day.
Get there in one, yeah? Okay. We're going to dive out here and see the bottom.
I got to get good at this, Ali, because it's going to be windy for the rest of this week. There's a fair chance that this series against, for all these 4 boats, are going to be sailed in quite a bit of breeze for the rest of the week. So they're going to have to, all the boats are going to go back and be seriously taking a look at how they handled the boat today and how could they possibly improve going into tomorrow.
25. Setting up. Plastic.
Well, they're looking very composed at the moment, the Japanese. Dealing really well with everything that's been thrown at them. Dean bringing all that experience to bear. And navigating the trampoline safely this time around after his tumble yesterday.
It looks like they're not even trying to foil tack right now, though. They're just kind of doing a conventional kind of hole in the water attack against, again, kind of conserving the assets and just making sure they get around the track with a pretty decent lead. 580 meters, I believe. So the Artemis has actually come into them a couple hundred meters over this last leg and a half. They only have 2 more to go after they make this critical turn. Oh, going around these turns, the G-forces, the speed and the loads is crazy. One more brutal attack and then a quick jibe. Something that the grinders certainly would have loved to avoid it.
You got this? Yeah, big Derek?
When you see orange, hold.
See, they're waiting for hydraulic pressure right now. They got red on the hydraulic pressure. When you see orange, you can go. Did you hear him say that? I'm guessing they have an orange, a red, orange, green system. When you have enough pressure, you can go. If you don't have enough pressure, don't do it. Technically, the right-of-way boat is Artemis here right now.
And the Japanese streaking away at 43 knots as well. Playing catch-up, the Swedes. Frankly, doing very well to be anywhere near the picture.
Here is where this lead just extends, though. I mean, it turns into a leg in no time here when you go from upwind to downwind.
Well, the Swedes are really shifting. They got up to 46 knots a moment or two ago, but they have a huge amount of ground to make up, and the challenge is fading fast here with the Japanese a long, long way in front, with only a short section of this leg to go, and then the reach to the finish. 82.4% of the time, the Dean Barker crew up on the foils.
Both quite low numbers, mainly because they're both kind of, the Japanese got out to such a big lead here. They're kind of sailing reasonably cautious. The Swedes very likely allowed them to get out to that big lead by sailing with a lot of hole in the water at the very beginning of the race. Backside of this squall right now, a little lighter air. Let's go out to Bruno Dubois on the water. Bruno, what do the conditions look like? What are we expecting for the next half hour or so?
The wind is still up there, but it's really clearing up on the top part of the course. So the rain going to stop, and probably going to have a pretty good one between Team New Zealand and VAR.
Thanks, Bruno. Turned weatherman for the day. And we're grateful to have him with us, the general manager of Groupama Team France. It's all about Japan, though, at the moment. In squally, feisty conditions, great control from Dean Barker and SoftBank Team Japan. Organisation and calm composure from the Japanese, who now have a significant 3-1 lead in the semi-final series. They've won both their races today against Artemis Racing of Sweden. And here comes Nathan Outridge. A very frustrating time for those on board the Swedish boat. We saw it come to the boil with Ian Percy absolutely exasperated at the penalties that they had received, but they had to bear away at that top mark. Couldn't, for whatever reason, complete their jibe. And you just feel there's plenty